President Trump there speaking from the White House within the last half an hour. A lot covered there as he spoke to the media. Trade tariffs, jobs, car production, steel production, also talking about the war in Ukraine. He said Ukraine would be involved in peace talks. He's spoken to both President Putin and President Zelensky. He said he trusts Putin, believes that he wants peace in Ukraine, and he wants to see Russia back in the G7. His words were, he would love to have Russia back in the G7. He also said he can't see Ukraine joining NATO. President Biden shouldn't have said it was a possibility. He said that was a stupid thing to say. We'll touch on trade and tariffs in just a moment, but let's talk about what President Trump said there about Russia and Ukraine. We can bring in our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who was following events for us from Washington. Mark, what did you make of what he had to say there with regard to Russia and Ukraine?
Well, to say, as you said, that lots coming out of that, I think is an understatement. I mean, every day we are getting a tsunami of news in these impromptu news conferences. I'm not sure you could even call it a news conference. It's just a free-flowing conversation between journalists from the press pool, the small group of journalists who are on a rota, who are selected to go into the Oval Office to ask Donald Trump questions. To be clear, this sort of arrangement just did not happen under President Biden. I don't recall it happening under any president in this free-flowing form, with the exception, of course, of Donald Trump. And to be honest, I don't know where to start. There was so much that came out of that. But let's start with Ukraine, despite the fact that the tariff announcement is absolutely huge and devastating if it sticks for countries right around the world, the UK included. But on Russia, since you asked about that, most interesting for me was he appeared to confirm that the Russians will be at the Munich Security Conference. Unless I've missed something, which is perfectly possible, given how fast things are moving, we did not know that the Russians were going to be at the Munich Security Conference, which is this weekend. I don't think Russia has been at that conference since before the invasion of Ukraine in quite a few years ago now. But there in the Oval Office, Donald Trump suggested or said that the Russians would be there alongside us, the Americans. And then he said, and I think the Ukrainians will be there as well. Well, we know the Ukrainians are going to be there. So unless he misspoke, and we're trying to get some clarity on that, there is a news line that Russia will be this weekend at the Munich Security Conference alongside the Americans. I guess this is the first moment that they will be alongside each other, probably since the Istanbul talks quite a few years ago. So remarkable there. He confirmed that Ukraine would have a seat at the table. There was some suggestion that he was basically conducting this peace negotiation just with Russia yesterday. He has dismissed that as nonsense, as has his defense secretary, and said that, of course, Ukraine will be at the table. He, as you said, went on about President Biden's various different mistakes and believed that the war in Ukraine, the invasion, would never have happened had he been president. Interestingly, he said he trusts President Putin. He said, I think Putin wants peace. I believe him. I trust him on this subject. Now, there has been some reporting by our colleagues at Axios here in the US who have got some sourcing about the conversation that went on between Trump and Zelensky. And what they are being told is that Zelensky told Trump that he should not trust Putin, and that the reason Putin is saying all this stuff to Trump to make him trust him is because Putin is scared of Donald Trump. So that's some reporting that we haven't got ourselves, but it's certainly quite interesting. But the top line is Trump's telling everyone, yeah, I trust Vladimir Putin. I take his word on stuff. Many in Europe would say Trump is mad to do that. And then this idea that Russia should be back in the G7. Of course, Russia expelled from the G7 when it invaded Crimea back in 2014. Obama was the president here then, and the G8 became the G7 at that moment. Well, Donald Trump believes that Russia should be back in the G7. It should become the G8 again. So that's that, Sarah-Jane. I don't know if you want to talk tariffs or if you've got someone else to do that.
Mark, we've got Paul Kelso, our business and economics correspondent, to cover that. But thank you very much, Mark Stone there. More from Mark Stone coming up in The World with Gillian Joseph tonight at 9 o'clock. But Paul is standing by for us in Westminster. And Paul, let's talk about tariffs, because that's initially what that conversation was about. It did go into many other areas, as it tends to do with Donald Trump. Donald Trump saying he wants a level playing field when it comes to tariffs for the purposes of fairness. If they were to be the terms, in simple terms, how would the UK fare, do you think?
The UK would face a massive shock to its certainly its largest single country trading relationship. It's the UK, the US is the UK's largest export partner. About 17% of UK exports head there. Hitherto, the UK had thought it could perhaps duck through the chaos of Donald Trump's trade policy, which has already seen 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium, a 36-hour trade war with Canada and Mexico put on pause, tariffs on China. They thought they could kind of duck through the middle because of this rather unique position we've ended up. Many in government didn't want it, but courtesy of Brexit, the UK is outside the EU, which is a major target of Donald Trump. He spoke extensively about how badly he believed the EU had treated the US when it came to trade. Just this morning, I spoke to the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, who was hoping he could get a UK exemption from those aluminium tariffs, because much of the aluminium that goes to the States from the UK is for defence uses, so he was hopeful there. This blows that away. And it's not just the UK. This is effectively, while there is a real war going on, which Mark has talked about, this is a trade war against everybody all at once. He's talking, and his Commerce Secretary, about levelling tariffs or similar against every country in the world that currently imposes tariffs on the US. So that's using, if they impose VAT, tax at borders, which the UK does on many goods that aren't subject to tariffs, he'll find a way of reciprocating. This is a declaration of war in trade terms that will gum up the entire trading system if it comes to pass. Of course, with all of these announcements, we have to see what actually happens. But for the UK, we actually have a trading surplus with the US. We haven't been in Donald Trump's sights, because his whole thesis here is that the US runs a massive trade deficit, nearly $1 trillion as a deficit. That is, it imports $1 trillion more of goods and services than it exports. And he believes that is unfair. That is effectively the US being ripped off, in his words, by the countries it is doing the importing from. And his tariffs are an attempt to equalise that figure. We heard a reporter mention a possible tax take from what Trump is calling the External Revenue Service, that is effectively taking money from other countries, of $1 trillion. That would match that up. Of course, the problem here is it isn't the exporters that pay the tariffs, it is the importers, and ultimately is American consumers who would face those charges. The theory is that these tariffs will mean it's too expensive, they won't turn to foreign imports, and instead US businesses will start making the chips that come from Taiwan, the luxury cars that come from Europe. And in the case of UK exports, it's cars, it's pharmaceuticals, it's mechanical power generators, and it's medical equipment. There are the big exports. But if he's going to match VAT at 20% on everything we export, that would, in theory, and I've seen some numbers, some modelling here from analysts who, to a degree, are guessing, because we haven't got the details, it's about £25 billion added to the trade bill. So this is potentially very disruptive to the UK, when hitherto, I think we'd felt, because of the trade surplus, because we're not high on the list of countries ripping off, in Donald Trump's words, the US, we might get away with it. But much more broadly, this is going to put every trade department and every treasury around the world on the back foot as they try and work out what the reality of this blizzard of promises, which he says will become reality by April the 1st, exactly what it means and what it does to a system of global trade pushing towards a more free and open system of trade that's been decades in the making, and Donald Trump is seeking to, once again, in his second term, tear up. This time, he says he's really serious.
Paul, thank you. Paul Kelso with the latest from Westminster. Now, there is a crisis every winter in the National Health Service, and increasingly it is accident and emergency departments that are bearing the brunt. Patients who cannot turn to another service will turn up at the doors of A&E, knowing that sooner or later, usually much later, they will be seen. But doctors have been telling Sky News that A&E is busier than it has ever been. Why? Well, because the waiting room is filling up with people who simply don't need to be there. They say anxiety is bringing what they call the walking well through their doors more than ever before. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi has this special report.
I went so hot all over, and I got back in the bed, but I couldn't bear it.
Marina has just suffered a heart attack. It's her third in just 2 years.
I was surprised the ambulance came within 2 hours, so I thought that was very good. And I was in here before 8 o'clock this morning.
It took 2 hours for the ambulance to get to you.
Well, they did say they had a priority list and I was on it. You've got to think there's lots of people calling ambulance.
Marina is 90 and lives alone. She knows this hospital well. Last year, they found she has an untreatable tumour.
You must be very worried.
Well, I'm 90 years old and the time, you can't go on forever. And I've had my life, and the best thing is to keep calm and carry on.
She's just one of the patients whose life was saved by the team at the Royal Berkshire Hospital. Over 2 months, Sky News has been given rare access as staff battled one of their most difficult winters yet.
Oh, beauty room flanking. Yes.
And we don't have a clue when she took it.
Omar Nafusi is the clinical lead at the Royal Berkshire Hospital A&E, one of the busiest in the southeast of England. It's the first week of December, and the worst of winter is looming. 191 patients today. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday. Is that typical? That seems quite high for a midweek afternoon.
Yeah, it's the new norm. We see probably about 480 to 500 patients a day on busy days. Sometimes over 500, those are really busy days. But that's becoming more and more frequent. Our attendances are going up and up and up year on year. And we are struggling. We are trying to cope as best we can and give patients the best care we can. But it's not always possible. That's the sad truth.
In 2010, NHS England set a standard of 95% of patients waiting for no more than 4 hours to be admitted, transferred or discharged. That target hasn't been met in a decade. So this one, that's 14 patients waiting for 941 minutes for a bed.
Yeah.
That's too long.
That is too long. Without a doubt, that's too long. And that's not what anyone wants. No one in this trust wants that to happen.
These waits of 15 hours and more are replicated across the country. And the figures are even more alarming when compared to total number of waits over 4 hours before the pandemic. With so many patients waiting so long, finding those in need of urgent treatment is like looking for a needle in a haystack.
There's a lot of anxiety after COVID. Young people with chest pain, which they've had for a few minutes, are concerned they had an heart attack. There's a lot of little things that before would have been nothing, but now is something.
An increase in young, anxious patients is combined with an ageing and medically complex community whose needs are increasingly time-consuming.
As other services sort of fall apart or are perceived to be more difficult to access, more people end up here because it's just the easy option. If you turn up, you'll be seen.
Because your doors are always open,
Yeah.
You never turn anyone away.
Not at the moment. We may get to the stage when actually we're just looking at people and saying this isn't an emergency.
Really?
Yeah.
You really think it'll go as far as that?
I think so, yeah.
And how long has she been suffering with this for?
Okay, so I checked your notes. I need to book you in for a routine appointment with Dr. Pearce.
More than 1 million people who attempted to reach their GP in December couldn't get through.
All right, I'll get that done.
That's despite there being more appointments than ever before.
Mental health anxiety.
Dr. Amit Sharma runs 4 surgeries near the hospital.
So what you can see here is the level of appointments have changed significantly. So November 2018, you can see it was about 27, 28 million. You can see last month it's peaking almost at 40 million.
What's driving it?
That's got to be around anxiety. That's what we see every day.
The government wants to move care away from hospitals into the community, to improve technology, and to put more of a focus on preventative medicine. But mental health targets are among those to have been cut.
When you're going through periods of anxiety, it often leads to physical symptoms. And often people are having chest pains or palpitations or breathing problems or other issues, and actually may not be able to realise that this is a mental health related condition, and because you're feeling physical symptoms. There's no doubt that fear and fear around health is rising as a nation.
We start with breaking news, and in the last few minutes, NHS says it's being hit by a tidal wave of flu hitting hospitals.
It's mid-December and the so-called quademic of COVID, RSV, norovirus, and particularly flu are climbing steeply across the country. Simon is among those affected. He's been in hospital for 5 days after being rushed in by ambulance.
I've suffered with asthma all my life from the age of 2, and I had diagnosed with COPD 5 years ago. But obviously, there's so much of it out there, so much flu germs out there, and you don't think about it until it happens to yourself. Well, you come in here.
Good morning, Mr. Shuri. Hello, hi, Dr. Thomas here. How are you?
He's an example of how medically complex patients can now be. On top of his chronic, lifelong breathing difficulties, just 6 months ago, he was put into an induced coma after suffering from sepsis after a kidney infection.
And you walking out at all? Or...
He says he's waited up to 2 days for a ward bed on previous visits.
Every time you come in, it's getting worse for them. It seems to be so much pressure on them, you know.
Simon is being kept in a side room to contain his infection.
We're seeing rapidly rising numbers. Obviously for us that impacts on both the numbers of people coming into hospital, our flow, because obviously these patients have to be cohorted together and it's more difficult to manage them in the general hospital setting. And there's impact on staff as well, because obviously our staff sickness rises as well.
Like all hospitals across the country, finding space on a respiratory ward like this one is extremely rare. As soon as a patient is fit to be discharged and a bed becomes empty, well, there's a queue of patients waiting to take it. A lack of spare beds leads to longer ambulance handovers. A total of over 600,000 hours have been lost to ambulance handover delays so far this winter. That's equivalent to around £31 million spent by the NHS, while ambulances are not available to make new pickups. In the first week of January, 24 hospitals declared critical incidents following a surge in flu cases. And while the Royal Berkshire Hospital wasn't among them, they did take the decision to temporarily not allow us entry to film. We were supposed to be inside today filming in your respiratory wards. We can't because it's just so busy. What's going on inside?
So our ward occupancy at the moment is running around 99% of our beds. So we are absolutely full. Our respiratory unit, half of it has been given over for patients with flu, and we've got a lot of very kind of unwell patients in the hospital at the moment. And each morning over the last few days, we've actually been starting the day with around another 20 to 30 patients actually in the emergency department waiting for beds. So the bed pressures have been really significant.
A day later, we caught up with Omar in the emergency department.
Busy, really, really busy. Every year we say it gets a little worse. This year has felt worse than any other year that I remember. I've been consultant for 15 years in emergency medicine, and this is by far the worst year so far. Since I last saw you, it's just the pure number of sick people that need to be admitted has just risen exponentially.
How does that impact patient safety? You can't have patients here long term, can you?
No, we can't, no. I mean, we've only got 20 major cubicles, so you could imagine 25 waiting for a bed, some are on chairs, some are in the waiting room, but we have no space to bring patients in off an ambulance to see and examine them.
Almost every single bay is full. There's just one free at the moment. There are patients waiting to be transferred to the wards, and while we've been here in the last couple of minutes, 2 more patients have been brought in by ambulance. Things in ED change very, very quickly. A major issue is capacity. Royal Berkshire Hospital opened in 1839, and parts of that original building are still used to this day. Others have fallen into ruin. Hospital leaders had hoped already approved plans for a new hospital would answer their growing list of problems. Now, the Health Secretary says that work can't start until 2037 at the earliest, blaming the previous government for over-promising and under-delivering.
There were never 40 new schemes, and many of them were extensions or refurbishments. Put simply, they weren't all new, some of them weren't hospitals, and there weren't 40 of them.
This listed building behind me is crumbling, and it's been out of use for more than a decade. The hospital has already spent £2.5 million just making sure it doesn't collapse. It would cost £15 million to make it usable. The trust is considering filling it with concrete to make it safer. A hospital running out of space and short of money currently has no alternative but to waste both. Another area where health leaders are concerned about wasted resources is in the number of patients fit for discharge but waiting for packages of care or transfers. People like Colin. He's been at the Royal Berkshire for 10 days after a car ran him over and left him with a dislocated ankle and a fractured leg. Do you know why you're being moved to a community hospital? Did they explain why?
Well, to get the physiotherapy. I mean, all I was doing on the general ward up there was being fed, really, and they weren't providing much in the way of physiotherapy, you know.
But it also helps to free up your bed in an acute hospital.
Absolutely, yeah. But there seems to be a dire shortage of beds in these sort of community hospitals.
In January alone, 500 patients came through this discharge lounge, the most on record. Nationally, at its peak this winter, nearly 14,000 hospital beds were filled with patients who were waiting to be discharged. Colin faces a long period of rehabilitation, and he's concerned about what this means for his family.
I'm the sort of full-time carer for my wife at home, and my daughter's looking after her at the moment. And that our house isn't suitable for, or, you know, it would have to be markedly adapted, you know, to take me. So, you know, I'm not absolutely sure what's going to happen.
You're worried?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I'm worried about my wife.
The government is expected to announce a new 10-year health plan in the spring. The NHS faces a backlog of 7.5 million routine operations and procedures. But there is also an urgent need to tackle the immediate high demands and crumbling infrastructure felt throughout hospitals like the Royal Berkshire, so that patients like Marina can get the dignified treatment they deserve.
Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi reporting there. Now, today, the Prime Minister was forced to abandon a visit to a housing development. This is after farmers protesting against the changes to inheritance tax descended on the event. As Sir Keir Starmer began his visit in Buckinghamshire, the demonstrators, many of whom had brought their tractors, made themselves heard.
Tariff, but they allow us to build in kind to get local. That's the real issue with the tariffs, and it goes across the whole borough.
Was that Darude, was it?
So this is the great thing is benefit in kind. So basically, it's like schools and these other things come out of the tariff, so you get local communities.
Well, as you can hear, a number of tractors are showing up and blocking the road near the site in Milton Keynes. I think I identified Sandstorm by Darude being played by one of those tractors. That's what I heard. The Prime Minister attempted to speak to house builders and developers, but we couldn't hear him, only the tractors. So, one of the organisers of today's protest joins us now, Philip Weston. Philip, good to see you. The attitude by farmers today, if the Prime Minister won't come to you, you will go to the Prime Minister.
Exactly that. And I think he needs to start realising that we are sick of not being spoken to directly. You know, working off of the figures that they've got has been proven to obviously be incorrect. You know, their own MPs, the Treasury, have come out against them regarding this and told them, you may need to give this a bit of a rethink. You know, we need to move on from them just repeating the same lines. You know, that isn't engaging with us. And we need to make a decision. We need to make a decision quickly about trying to get this either a complete U-turn or come to some other midpoint agreement.
Philip, you got fairly close to the Prime Minister, enough to shout across to him and ask him about this, but you got no response from him. Journalists did catch up with the Prime Minister after your protest, though, and they did ask him about it. Let's just play his response.
These are political choices, but what you can't have is interest rates coming down, the growth we need in the economy, your waiting list coming down, and maintain the tax break for farmers. And people watching this will understand that that is a choice. They will know which they would prefer. Do they prefer their waiting list to come down? Do they want their mortgages to come down, the economy to start working for everyone? That's what we're trying to achieve. Or do we want to keep a tax break for farmers? But you can't have both.
Philip, what do you make of that? It's a choice between mortgages going down, growth in the economy, NHS waiting lists, or you getting a tax break.
Where's any of that been seen to be getting anywhere near? You know, he seems to think of himself as some sort of messiah. Unfortunately, he's just made himself look a bit of a silly boy today. What is he hoping to achieve by the inheritance tax, first off? He says it's to raise 500 million.
Raising money, he says, to fund schools
That's
or
it.
the NHS.
Yeah, 500 million is the target figure that they've said they're going to raise. If that was the case, fine, fair. Unfortunately, shortly after all that was announced, he also announced he was giving 550 million away to foreign farming projects, which were then going to obviously affect imports into this country and act against us even further. So how is that money seen to be going towards public services when they're giving more away than what they're receiving off of us?
You've also been ticked off by the NFU president today, who said disruptive protests like the one that you put on today are not helpful. In fact, they're counterproductive. What's your response to that?
Well, unfortunately, it isn't just the NFU who have come out about this today. Also, Save British Farming, who hosted the event Monday, or similar. Unfortunately, we're dealing with this web server heads up for Save British Farming. I mean, that was originally set up as a pro-EU group by the Liberal Democrats. And unfortunately, their ratings and their membership has been hit significantly today as a result of what she's come out and said.
Well, they do say, the NFU, that they've got a meeting at the Treasury next week, which is what you want. You're talking about a lack of communication, a lack of the government, the Chancellor, the Treasury listening to what you have to say, the counter-argument. The NFU are going to meet with the Treasury next week.
The NFU, as a union for farmers, isn't acting on our best interests. Their membership is probably more reflected by the fact that they're selling insurance than what it is that farmers are actually putting trust in them to act on their behalf. That is where a lot of their membership comes from. You have to be a member of the NFU to take out their insurance. And unfortunately, they are getting hit very hard at the moment with their membership. People are leaving them left, right and centre because they've lost faith in the NFU and Tom Bradshaw that's heading it up.
Well, perhaps they'll do themselves a favour if they go in there and get concessions. What do you want them to go in and say to the Treasury? Because the government may not go back on this. The Prime Minister certainly shows no signs of a U-turn, but you may get a concession, maybe.
Talking so far by the NFU hasn't shown to be done anything for us. You know, they've been in various meetings, they say, and, you know, we are still where we are now. The things that we are needing to get done now, and Farmers to Action are indeed pushing for at the moment, is to get the inheritance tax completely abolished for everybody. And how can we say this? There needs to be more thought given to the people that can't get around this. You know, the 7-year rule, you've probably heard, they've said people can gift it into trusts, they can gift it into limited businesses. That isn't going to work for your 80-year-old farmer that is either got an illness or just age-related. He may not live that long. And unfortunately, we are finding ourselves in a situation where those people are seriously considering ending their lives before April 26 as a result of this. Now, if they gave us a concession, if they allowed us some time to manoeuvre and readjust our business for this, give us a 7-year grace period, allow us to get things sorted, put in place. But that isn't the case.
OK, Philip, we are going to have to leave it there. But look, I know there are more protests planned, and I'm sure we will speak again in the coming weeks and months. Thank you so much for talking to us today. Philip Weston there, one of the organisers of the Buckinghamshire farmers' protest today that went to see the Prime Minister. Now, environmental campaigners in Wiltshire have welcomed a decision by the council to close a road to protect migrating toads. Every year, dozens of toads are run over whilst crossing Smallbrook Road in Warminster as they try to reach their breeding ponds. Volunteers patrol the area to try and save as many of them as they can. But now the council has approved a traffic regulation order which will see the road close overnight until the end of April. I'm joined now by Iain Perkins and Dexter Painter-Coates from the Warminster Toad Patrol Group. Really good to see you both. Thank you so much for joining us on the UK Tonight. I'm going to come to you first, Dexter, because this was your bright idea. Tell me what was happening before this agreement was put in place. What was happening to the toads?
Basically, every night they were getting ran over by all the cars and motorbikes that were coming through. And it was quite a big problem for them because of that.
Yeah, really big problem. Iain, talk to us about how important this is, because, you know, this could set a precedent for other areas of the country, because this isn't a problem just particular to Wiltshire.
No, there are lots of toad crossings all around the country. Only a few have their sort of roads closed because I think there's been studies showing that 68% of the common toad has declined in the last 30 years. And where we are in Warminster, 5 years ago, there was a small group of us helping saving the toads, where we saved about 3,000 of them a year. Last year, we only managed to save 642. And there was a further 347 died. So we're on a massive decline. And we want to save these toads for the likes of Dexter and his friends. We've got a great group of young people helping with the Toad Patrol. And we want to save it for them and for them to enjoy, for their children to enjoy this great
Yeah, I mean, my
show.
children are into Paw Patrol, but Toad Patrol has got a much better ring to it. Dexter, talk me through your duties. How do you keep these toads safe?
So basically every few nights a week, we go out with our flashlights, our high-vis vests, and we go out looking for the toads. If they are on the roads, then we'll just gently pick them up with our gloves and put them in a safe direction for them to be all safe and happy, and for them to keep on going about life and stuff. And sometimes we'll record them about the sections where they're in. If it is a male or a female, and how big they are.
So you monitor them because, of course, this is breeding season. And Dexter, is the road only going to be shut for this breeding season? Because I hear a good time to look for toads around your area is Valentine's Day.
Yes, it is only going to be closed for the spring.
Yeah, OK. And Iain, just a final word about, you know, why it is so important to protect toads. Just a tiny amphibian, but why they're so important to the local ecosystem.
Well, they are sort of a key species. We lose them. They're sort of quite an apex predator, and we might lose all the other species below them. So let's save them. They're part of our folklore. Yeah, they're fantastic creatures, and it's just a shame getting them squashed.
Well, listen, Dexter Painter-Coates, congratulations for pushing this and getting the roads closed so those toads can cross the road safely. Okay. And Iain, thank you as well. Iain and Dexter there, part of the Toad Patrol in Wiltshire. That's all from the UK tonight. You can catch up on the highlights on our webpage, skynews.com. We'll be back on Monday night at 8 o'clock. Matt Barbette will be here for you all week next week. Up next, it is The World with Gillian Joseph. Thanks for watching.